The morning sun shone gently over the town as people moved about in their daily routine. The grocery store on the corner was especially busy because it was the end of the month and many families were shopping for their needs. Inside the store, the air smelled of fresh bread and polished floors, and the sound of carts rolling created a soft rhythm. Shoppers moved between the aisles, filling their baskets with vegetables, fruits, and items for their homes. Among the customers was a kind, elderly woman named Grace. She was known in the neighborhood as someone who always smiled, greeted people warmly, and carried herself with dignity. Her hair had turned silver over the years and her walk had slowed, but her eyes still sparkled with kindness. Grace had lived in the town for decades, and many people respected her wisdom and her gentle nature. That day, Grace had come to the store with a simple list. She wanted to buy bread, some milk, a few fresh vegetables, and tea. She walked slowly down the aisles, carefully choosing what she needed, and greeting the employees who passed her by. Some of them smiled back, while others were too busy, but Grace never minded. She believed a kind word never went to waste. As she reached the counter, the line was long. Customers were waiting with full carts, and the cashier was working as quickly as possible. Grace stood patiently, holding her basket in her hands. Her shoulders ached from the weight, but she never complained. She had lived a life where patience was her greatest strength. The store manager, a man named Paul, was moving around the area, checking on staff and looking at his watch as if he was in a hurry. He noticed Grace standing at the counter and frowned. He seemed irritated that she was taking too much time placing her basket down. His voice was sharp when he approached the cashier, telling her to move faster. Grace looked at him kindly and said in a soft voice that there was no need to rush. She explained that the girl at the counter was doing her best and that patience made everything smoother. But Paul did not like being corrected, especially not in front of other customers. His pride grew heavy and his tone became harder. The customers around noticed the way Paul spoke to Grace. They shifted uncomfortably, whispering among themselves. Everyone in town knew Grace as a woman of respect, and the sight of a manager speaking so harshly to her made people uneasy. Grace, however, remained calm. She placed her basket gently on the counter and waited, her eyes steady, her voice quiet. In those moments, something invisible filled the air. It was not anger, but a sense of justice waiting to reveal itself. The people watching could feel that this ordinary shopping trip was turning into something much larger. Grace was not just an elderly woman in the store that day. She carried with her a presence that demanded respect, a presence that came from years of living with dignity. Paul did not notice this. He was too caught up in his pride. He muttered complaints, telling the cashier and even Grace that people needed to learn how to move faster. His words echoed in the silence of the line, and his tone left a bitter taste in the air. Customers exchanged glances, unsure of what to do, but they felt something was about to change. Grace took a deep breath, not out of frustration, but with calm strength. She placed her hand gently on the counter and looked at Paul directly. Her eyes did not carry anger, only truth. The moment stretched, and for the first time, Paul hesitated. The room felt heavier, as if time itself slowed down. People leaned closer without realizing, drawn into the quiet power of the scene. Grace's calmness was stronger than Paul's loudness. She had seen much in her life, and she knew when it was time to speak. Her words were few, but they carried weight. In that silence, the foundation of the store's management was about to be tested in a way no one expected. The ordinary grocery store had suddenly become the stage for something extraordinary, and everyone standing there knew they were about to witness a moment that would be remembered in town for years to come. The store grew quiet as Grace stood calmly at the counter. The cashier looked nervous. The customers whispered softly, and Paul tried to hold on to his authority. But there was something in Grace's steady eyes that unsettled him. He had dealt with many people before, yet this moment felt different. Grace spoke in a gentle but firm voice. She told Paul that respect was not something anyone could demand with power. It was something that had to be earned with kindness and fairness. Her words were soft, but they traveled through the room like a clear bell. Everyone heard them, and everyone felt their meaning. Paul forced a small laugh, trying to dismiss her words. He said the store had rules and that he was only doing his job, but his voice no longer carried the same weight. Customers were no longer looking at him with respect, but with quiet judgment. They saw the difference between his impatience and Grace's patience. Grace turned slightly toward the cashier and thanked her for working so hard. The young girl's eyes watered as she nodded quickly, grateful for Grace's kindness. For her, this moment was more than a simple thank you. It was a reminder that her effort mattered, even if her manager did not see it. The line of customers slowly began to shift. Some stepped forward to stand a little closer to Grace, as if silently showing their support. Others nodded in agreement with her words. It was not a loud protest, but the atmosphere made it clear that the people stood with her. Paul noticed this change, and his face tightened. He did not like losing control, especially in front of so many people. He cleared his throat and tried to sound confident, saying that the store must run quickly and that delays cost time and money. Grace listened without interruption. When he finished, she spoke again. She told him that a business built only on speed and numbers could never last. True success came when customers were treated with dignity, when workers were valued, and when leaders carried humility instead of pride. Her voice did not rise, but her words carried more weight than any order Paul had ever given. The customers began to clap softly. It was not loud, but it was enough to make Paul freeze. His authority was slipping, and he could feel it. He tried to speak again, but the sound of approval for Grace drowned him out. For the first time, Paul felt the strength of a community standing against him. Grace did not gloat, nor did she show anger. She only stood tall, her silver hair catching the light, her presence unshaken. She had not come to the store looking for conflict, yet life had placed her in this moment, and she carried it with grace, living true to her name. A man from the back of the line stepped forward. He introduced himself as a longtime customer of the store. He said he had seen many employees treated poorly over the years, but no one had spoken up. Today, watching Grace stand firm gave him courage to say what had been on his heart for a long time. He turned to Paul and said the store needed leaders who respected people, not leaders who ruled with impatience. One by one, other customers began to share small words. Some thanked Grace for speaking. Others looked directly at Paul and said they were tired of feeling unvalued when they came to the store. The voices rose, not in anger but in truth. Each word added to the growing wave that now stood against the manager. Paul's face grew pale. He had never faced such resistance before. His role as manager had always given him power, but in that moment, the people no longer recognized that power. They had given their respect to Grace instead. Grace remained calm. She placed her items in her basket and waited quietly as if nothing unusual had happened. But inside the hearts of the customers, something powerful was growing. They felt united and they felt ready for change. No one realized yet how quickly that change was going to arrive. Within only a few minutes, the balance of the store would be shaken completely. Grace's calm stand was the beginning of something larger, and everyone present could feel it approaching like the steady roll of distant thunder. The air in the store carried a new kind of silence, the kind that arrives before something important takes place. Customers stood a little taller, employees peeked from behind shelves, and the cashier wiped her hands nervously on her apron. Everyone could sense that Grace's words had planted a seed that was already beginning to grow. Grace herself stood calmly, waiting for her turn as if nothing had changed. Yet the entire atmosphere of the store now revolved around her presence. Her quiet strength had given courage to voices that had long been silent. It was as if the walls of the building were listening, holding their breath to see what would happen next. At that moment, a woman in a neat business suit entered the store. Her name was Clara, and she was the regional director who oversaw several branches, including this one. Clara visited stores without warning, preferring to see how they truly operated when no one expected her. She had arrived planning to check inventory and speak briefly with the staff, but the unusual silence greeted her instead. As Clara walked inside, her eyes immediately caught the sight of customers gathered near the counter, and the manager standing stiffly with unease. She noticed Grace, the elderly woman who stood with quiet dignity, and she sensed quickly that this was no ordinary shopping day. Clara stepped closer, her heels clicking softly against the floor, and asked what was going on. The cashier hesitated, unsure whether to speak. Paul, the manager, quickly tried to take control. He told Clara that the store was busy and that customers were causing delays. He said the staff needed to move faster and that everything was under control. His words came quickly, but they did not sound convincing. Clara listened, her expression calm. She had been in management long enough to know when someone was hiding the truth. She turned toward Grace and asked her kindly if she had experienced any problem while shopping. Grace smiled gently and replied that the only problem was the lack of respect shown toward both customers and staff. Her voice was steady, her tone respectful, yet her words carried undeniable truth. The customers around nodded in agreement. One by one, they shared short examples of times they felt rushed, ignored, or treated without care. The cashier quietly added that she often felt pressured and scolded by Paul even when she worked as hard as she could. Her voice trembled, but Clara encouraged her to continue, and the young woman spoke with honesty. Clara's eyes grew serious as she listened. She did not interrupt, but she wrote down notes and gave her full attention to every person who spoke. She noticed how the entire room respected Grace and how her presence had united strangers to speak with one voice. Clara understood that this was not just a small complaint. It was a reflection of the way the store had been managed for a long time. Paul grew restless. He tried again to interrupt, saying that people were exaggerating and that the store's success depended on discipline. But his words no longer carried authority. Customers no longer looked at him as their leader. Employees lowered their eyes, unwilling to support his claims. His control had slipped away, and he could feel it in the silence that followed every excuse. Grace did not argue with him. She simply stood with her hands resting on the counter, her basket beside her, her calmness shining brighter with each passing moment. When Clara turned back to her, Grace said something simple yet powerful. She told Clara that respect was the foundation of every business, and that without it, even the largest store would eventually fall. Clara nodded slowly, her mind already making decisions. She thanked Grace for speaking and thanked the customers for sharing their experiences. She then turned to Paul with steady eyes and said that she needed to review his management immediately. Her words carried no anger, only firm authority. The store grew completely silent. Everyone felt the shift. The power that once sat in the hands of Paul now belonged to Clara, guided by the truth spoken by Grace. Something larger than a simple shopping trip had begun, and no one present would forget it. Grace remained as calm as ever. She did not raise her voice, she did not seek attention. Yet her strength had moved an entire room. And though the outcome was not yet clear, everyone sensed that change had already entered through the door, carried in by the quiet footsteps of dignity and respect. Clara's presence changed the air in the store. The customers no longer whispered but stood quietly, waiting to hear what she would say next. Employees came out from behind the aisles, their faces filled with both fear and hope. They had never seen a regional director visit during such a moment, and many wondered if this was the chance for their voices to finally be heard. Paul tried to maintain his posture, but sweat gathered at his temples. He had always believed his title protected him, yet the confidence in Clara's eyes unsettled him. She was not fooled by quick words or empty excuses. Her calmness was sharper than any loud command he could give. Clara asked the staff to step forward. She wanted to hear from them directly. At first, no one moved. Years of silence and fear made them hesitate. But then the young cashier, encouraged by Grace's kindness, took a small step. Her voice trembled at first, but she explained how difficult it was to work under constant pressure. She described how she often stayed late without thanks and how even the smallest mistake was met with harsh words. Her honesty opened a door. Soon another employee stepped forward. He worked in the storeroom and said that deliveries were often mishandled because Paul cared more about speed than safety. Another shared that schedules were unfair and that requests for rest were ignored. As each story was told, Clara listened closely, giving every worker her full attention. The customers nodded in support, many murmuring that they had witnessed these problems too. They remembered waiting in long lines while staff looked overwhelmed, and they recalled moments when Paul's impatience was clear. What had been unspoken for months was now revealed in the open. Grace did not interrupt. She stood quietly, allowing others to speak, her presence like a steady flame guiding the room. Every time someone hesitated, they looked at her and found courage in her calm eyes. She had not planned to become the voice of the people, but her dignity had inspired others to rise. Paul grew restless. He claimed that workers were exaggerating, that the customers were being dramatic, and that the store ran well under his leadership. But his words sounded weak compared to the honesty filling the room. Each excuse was met with silence, and in that silence his authority faded further. Clara finally spoke. She thanked the employees for their courage and told them she valued honesty above all else. She said a store was not only about profits or speed, but about people, both customers and staff. Without respect, no business could stand strong. Her words carried the weight of truth, and the room felt lighter as she spoke. Turning to Paul, she explained that leadership was not about control, but about service. A true leader lifted others, gave them strength, and earned their loyalty through fairness. She told him she had heard enough to know changes were necessary. Her tone was calm but final, and everyone listening felt that his position was hanging by a thread. The customers exchanged hopeful glances. Some smiled at Grace, silently thanking her for being the spark that lit this fire of truth. Employees stood straighter, no longer hiding their thoughts. For the first time in a long while, they felt seen and valued. Grace finally spoke again, her words gentle yet strong. She said that the heart of any community was respect. When a business forgot this, it lost its way. But when respect returned, everything else could be rebuilt. Her voice carried no blame, only wisdom. And in that moment, she gave both staff and customers a vision of what could be possible. Clara nodded deeply. She assured everyone that change was coming, and it would come swiftly. She promised to review not just this store but the entire management system. She thanked Grace personally, saying her calm truth had revealed what many had hidden. The store stood in quiet awe. The moment felt historic, though it was unfolding in an ordinary grocery store. Grace lowered her eyes modestly, never seeking praise. Yet she had shifted the future with only her steady presence. And though no one knew exactly what Clara's next action would be, they all sensed it would not only remove what was broken, but also plant something stronger in its place. The room remained quiet after Clara spoke. It was the kind of silence that carried both relief and curiosity. Everyone felt that something big was about to happen. Employees glanced at each other with a mix of nervousness and hope, while customers waited patiently, eager to see what direction the situation would take. Paul stood stiffly, trying to hold on to the last pieces of authority. He had built his confidence on giving orders and expecting silence in return. Now that silence had turned against him, and every eye in the store looked not at him but at Clara and Grace. Clara cleared her throat gently and asked the staff to step aside for a moment. She wanted to speak directly with the customers who were standing in line. Her voice was calm yet firm, the kind of tone that made people trust her. She asked if they felt their experiences at the store reflected what the employees had described. One woman raised her hand and said she often felt rushed when shopping here. Another man added that he had seen workers scolded in front of customers, which made him uncomfortable. Others nodded, agreeing that the store had lost the warmth a neighborhood place should have. Clara listened carefully, taking mental notes of each comment. Grace remained near the counter, her hands resting on her basket. She did not interrupt or draw attention to herself. Yet people glanced at her again and again, almost as if they were looking for strength in her quiet presence. Even Clara felt it. Every word Grace had spoken earlier still lingered in the air like a steady light guiding the conversation. Paul could no longer stay silent. He interrupted, saying that customers did not understand the pressures of running a store, and that his decisions had kept the branch successful for years. His voice grew louder, as if he believed raising it would give him back control. But the louder he spoke, the more the room seemed to turn away from him. Clara did not raise her voice in return. Instead, she waited for him to finish. When the room was quiet again, she explained clearly that leadership was not proven by numbers alone. A true leader did not only manage products and schedules. A true leader managed hearts, building trust through fairness and kindness. Her words struck deep, and many nodded in agreement. Paul tried to defend himself again, but his words stumbled. It was clear to everyone that he no longer stood in a place of authority. The power had shifted quietly but surely. The employees no longer looked at him for direction. Customers no longer respected his role. In that moment, Paul seemed smaller than he had ever been. Grace finally spoke, her voice as gentle as ever. She said that mistakes could happen in any workplace, but the strength of a leader was shown in how they responded. Respect, she reminded the room, was a gift that returned tenfold when it was given sincerely. Her words calmed the tension and reminded everyone that this was not only about blame, but about building something better. Clara turned toward Grace and gave a small smile. She said that wisdom was more valuable than any policy, and she thanked Grace again for sharing hers. Then Clara addressed the entire room. She announced that she would be calling an immediate review of the store's management. Until that review was complete, all decisions would go through her directly. The staff gasped softly, realizing how serious this was. The customers began to clap. It was not loud at first, but it grew steadily as more joined in. The sound filled the store, rising like a wave of encouragement. Employees smiled, their shoulders relaxing as if a heavy burden had been lifted. The cashier wiped a tear from her eye, no longer afraid of speaking up. Paul stood frozen, his usual confidence gone. He had always believed power was his by title alone. But now he saw that respect was something no title could guarantee. He looked around, searching for support, but found none. Grace lowered her eyes humbly, never seeking credit for what had happened. She had simply spoken the truth, and the truth had done the rest. Clara, watching her, knew that this was not just a turning point for the store, but for the entire team that worked within it. And though the final outcome was still to be revealed, everyone present felt the tide had already shifted. The store was no longer the same place it had been that morning. A new chapter had begun, and its pages were being written with courage, honesty, and respect. The clapping slowly faded, but the energy it left behind remained strong. The store felt lighter, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from its walls. Customers smiled at one another, employees stood taller, and Clara's calm leadership filled the room with confidence. For the first time in a long while, the store felt like a community instead of just a business. Grace stood quietly, watching the faces around her. She had not sought attention, yet people treated her as the center of the moment. Some gave her small nods of gratitude, others smiled warmly, and the cashier whispered a soft thank you. Grace returned each gesture with the same kindness she had always carried. Clara stepped forward and asked the employees to gather near her. She wanted to hear what changes they hoped for if the management were to shift. At first they hesitated, unsure if it was safe to speak openly, but Clara's expression encouraged them. One young worker said he hoped for fair schedules where time off would be respected. Another wished for training programs so they could do their jobs better. The cashier spoke again, asking for a workplace where mistakes could be corrected with guidance instead of fear. Clara wrote down each request, nodding as she listened. She promised them that their voices mattered, and that any new management would need to build trust instead of breaking it. The employees' shoulders relaxed, and some even smiled as hope replaced years of silence. The customers, too, joined in the conversation. One man suggested the store could host small community days where neighbors felt welcome. A woman proposed that loyalty should be rewarded not just with discounts but with better service and care. Clara welcomed every idea, assuring the group that the store's future was about more than numbers. It was about people. Paul stood near the wall, silent and tense. His pride wanted to argue, but he knew the room no longer belonged to him. Every word spoken confirmed that his way of leading had left wounds instead of growth. The silence around him felt heavy, and for the first time he truly saw how much he had lost. Grace finally spoke again, her voice steady and gentle. She reminded everyone that change was not about replacing one person with another, but about creating a culture where kindness lived at the center. She said that when leaders remembered they were servants of the people, communities flourished. Her words touched hearts deeply. Several employees nodded, and even Clara paused for a moment, reflecting on the wisdom she had just heard. Clara then addressed the entire room. She announced that effective immediately, Paul would step aside until the review was complete. During this time, she herself would oversee the store, and she would bring in a temporary team to help manage operations fairly. Gasps of surprise filled the room, followed quickly by soft murmurs of approval. The cashier could not hide her relief. Other employees exchanged glances of encouragement. Customers clapped again, louder this time, their voices blending into a chorus of support. The store was no longer a place of tension. It had become a place of unity. Paul looked down at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. He had lost not because someone shouted louder than him, but because someone stood calmer and truer than him. Grace's presence had revealed the weakness in his pride. He stepped back quietly, no longer a figure of authority, but only a reminder of what had gone wrong. Grace placed her basket gently on the counter, finally ready to pay for her items. Clara herself insisted on ringing up the purchase as a gesture of respect. When she handed the bag to Grace, she said softly that her actions had brought light into the store. Grace smiled kindly and reminded her that light could be found in everyone if given the chance. As Grace walked toward the door, customers stepped aside to let her pass. Some touched her hand gently in gratitude. Others whispered blessings. Employees looked at her with admiration, their hearts filled with courage. She left quietly, without ceremony, but the echo of her presence remained strong. Clara turned back to the room and told everyone that this was only the beginning. The store would change, and the change would spread beyond its walls. It was no longer just about management. It was about building a place where respect was lived every day. The people cheered softly, their faces glowing with hope. The ordinary grocery store had become the setting of an extraordinary moment, and everyone knew they had been part of something that would be remembered for years to come. The store felt different after Grace left. The tension that had hung in the air for years was gone, replaced by a sense of calm and possibility. Employees moved with a new confidence, customers smiled more freely, and even the sunlight streaming through the windows seemed warmer, as if it recognized the change that had taken place. Clara stayed behind to speak with the staff. She wanted to make sure everyone felt heard and supported. She asked what they thought would make the store better for both employees and customers. One young employee said he wished for clear communication and fairness in assigning tasks. Another suggested regular meetings where everyone could share ideas without fear. The cashier, still smiling, said she hoped for encouragement instead of scolding, and that everyone could feel appreciated. Clara nodded. She promised that every suggestion would be considered carefully, and that she would personally ensure that the temporary management team followed these principles. Her words carried authority but also warmth. The staff felt hope stirring in their hearts, a hope they had not felt in a long time. Outside, customers continued to watch and discuss the events of the morning. Many of them were longtime visitors who had seen how the store was run before. They were amazed at the courage and wisdom Grace had shown. One customer said quietly to another that Grace had not only spoken for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt ignored. Another added that sometimes the simplest act of calm strength could make the biggest difference. Back inside, Paul gathered his things. His pride had been bruised, but he seemed to understand that his approach would not work here anymore. Clara did not need to explain why he had to step aside. The truth was clear in the honest voices of the employees and the community. He left quietly, leaving the store in a state of calm authority guided by fairness. The employees began to organize themselves, encouraged by Clara's presence and Grace's example. They worked together, helping each other restock shelves, clean counters, and assist customers. There was laughter as they shared small stories of past mistakes and lessons learned. For the first time in months, work did not feel like a burden. It felt like a shared purpose. Clara watched them with satisfaction. She knew that the culture of the store could only be rebuilt through patience and respect. She also knew that Grace's simple act of standing up had created a foundation stronger than any rules or policies. It was trust and dignity that would hold the store together from now on. Meanwhile, customers noticed the change. Some approached the counter with questions, and staff responded with patience and care. Small acts of kindness began to fill the store, creating a sense of community that had been missing. A young mother thanked an employee for helping her reach a high shelf. An older man complimented another for smiling while assisting him. Each moment reinforced that respect and consideration had become the heart of the store. Word of the morning's events spread quickly. People talked about Grace's courage and the change that followed. Some customers returned later in the day, curious to see the new atmosphere, and they left impressed by the kindness and attention they received. Even those who had been skeptical before felt reassured that the store was now a place they could trust. Clara called a brief meeting before she left. She reminded the staff that every day was an opportunity to show respect and care. She encouraged them to speak openly, support each other, and always treat customers with patience. Her voice was gentle but firm, and everyone left the meeting feeling inspired. Grace's impact lingered in the store even after she had gone. Her calm strength had not only corrected a wrong but had also reminded everyone present that leadership was not about authority alone. It was about listening, understanding, and acting with fairness. As the day progressed, the store felt alive in a way it had not before. Laughter, conversation, and the sound of friendly service filled the air. Grace's influence had opened a path for a better future, and everyone in the store understood that the changes were just beginning. The next morning, the store felt brighter than ever. Employees arrived with smiles, ready to work together. There was a sense of excitement in the air, as if everyone knew that something important had changed the day before. The shelves were stocked carefully, the counters were clean, and small signs of care and organization were everywhere. Clara had returned early to meet with the temporary management team she had assigned. They were kind, attentive, and fair, eager to make sure the store ran smoothly while respecting both staff and customers. She reminded them that the goal was not only to manage the store, but to create an environment where people felt valued and appreciated. Employees listened carefully. The young cashier spoke up first, sharing ideas for improving customer service. Another worker suggested ways to make tasks easier and more efficient. Clara nodded at each suggestion, showing that their voices mattered. This open communication made everyone feel included and motivated. Customers who arrived noticed the difference immediately. They were greeted warmly, assisted patiently, and treated with respect. Many of them whispered to each other about how the store felt different, calmer, and more welcoming. A small group of regulars smiled as they saw the employees moving with confidence and teamwork. Meanwhile, word about Grace spread further. People who had heard the story from neighbors came to the store, curious to see the woman whose calm presence had caused such a big change. Grace had already finished her shopping for the day, but her reputation grew quietly. She was admired not for her age or appearance, but for her wisdom, dignity, and courage. Clara walked among the employees, listening to small stories and giving encouragement. She reminded them that leadership was about service, fairness, and attention to detail. Each employee felt inspired, understanding that their work mattered and that they were trusted to make decisions responsibly. Paul, the former manager, had quietly left the company. He was no longer part of the store, but the lesson he left behind was clear. Leadership required respect, humility, and understanding. Authority alone could not keep a business strong. Those who had once feared speaking now felt free to share their ideas and opinions. As the morning continued, small acts of kindness filled the store. A worker helped a child reach a toy from a high shelf. A customer offered a kind word to the cashier for her patience. Another employee showed a colleague the best way to arrange fresh vegetables. Each action reflected the changes that had begun the day before. Clara called another brief meeting in the afternoon. She praised the staff for their hard work and encouraged them to continue building a supportive, respectful environment. She reminded them that every day was an opportunity to show care to both customers and coworkers. The staff left the meeting smiling, feeling valued and motivated. By the end of the day, the store had become more than just a place to shop. It had become a community hub where people felt welcome, heard, and respected. Employees and customers alike knew that the atmosphere had changed for the better. They understood that the strength of a place was measured by kindness, fairness, and respect, not just efficiency. Grace's influence remained a guiding presence in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed her actions. Though she had returned home quietly, her calm courage continued to inspire. Employees remembered her advice, customers remembered her dignity, and Clara remembered the power of listening and acting with fairness. The store had been transformed, not by rules or fear, but by truth, wisdom, and the quiet strength of one remarkable woman. What began as an ordinary day had turned into a lasting lesson about respect, leadership, and the power of kindness. As the sun set over the town, the store glowed softly with life, laughter, and harmony. The story of that morning would be told for years, a reminder that even small acts of courage and calm truth could create extraordinary change. And so, the store continued stronger than ever, guided by the principles Grace had shown, where everyone knew that respect, patience, and fairness were at the heart of every action.